Chapter 20, Florida. Shortly after Jim Barnett fired me in Georgia, he called me to say he had gotten me booked in Florida, which was another territory he owned a piece of. Florida was a funny territory when it came to owners. Eddie Graham was the real owner, but over the years he sold off something like 180% of the booking office to guys like Hiro Matsuda, Duke Kyomuka, Mike Graham, Jerry Briscoe, Jack Briscoe, Buddy Colt, and Jim Barnett. He would sell anyone a percentage of his booking office if he was having a bad time and needed money, and didn't care who owned what. When Jim told me the news, I can't say I was thrilled, because Florida didn't have the greatest reputation when it came to payoffs. But the silver lining was that I knew Bill Watts was a fantastic booker. I went down to Florida in February 1974 and moved into a trailer in a Tampa Orange Grove. A couple of chapters earlier, I was an international player, living it up in my Australian penthouse and drinking tea with the good King Yao Kia. Now here I was in a trailer. What a trip. I would have loved to have brought the Samoans to Florida with me, but apparently, after they learned that Robert Fuller had threatened me, they tracked him down and smacked him around pretty good. They were very protective of me as I was of them. Needless to say, they were fired immediately and flew back to Oakland, soured on the wrestling business. I eventually got T.O. Taylor booked in Florida, but at the time I arrived I had no one to manage, so Bill suggested that I go around a couple of weeks wrestling under a mask as the Jackal, watch the shows, and see if there was anyone I wanted to manage. Then when the time was right I could be unveiled as Playboy Gary Hart. I did just that, wrestling on the undercard every night and watching the rest of the matches. I noticed a lot of great, young talent like Kevin Sullivan, Mike Graham, Steve Kieran, and Don Morocco, but the one that really stood out to me was Pak Song. He was really unusual looking, and the moment I saw him, I knew that I wanted to manage him. As soon as I told Bill that I wanted to manage and develop Pak, I went on TV and lost my Jackal mask in a match against Jack Briscoe, who was the NWA champion at the time. It only took Jack 3 minutes to beat me, rip my mask off, and revealed that the Jackal had been Playboy Gary Hart, but when he did, I received a very high-profile entrance into Florida. Pak Song was a big-name athlete in Korea, who had served in the Korean Marines, and was so well known that he married Miss Korea. They moved to the United States so he could pursue a career in professional wrestling, and had twin daughters while he was in Amarillo working for the Funks. Pak was a wonderful, family-oriented guy, and we hit it off instantly. I also became Dusty Rhodes' manager once again, and it was great to be reunited with him. We didn't live too far from each other, so we would often drive to the towns together. One night after the matches, we were driving home to Tampa in Dusty's car, and Little Tokyo, the midget wrestler, was in the back seat. We were listening to music, I was smoking a little reefer, and Dusty and Little Tokyo were drinking beers. It was a 300-mile trip, and at one point Little Tokyo passed out. When we got to Tampa, Dusty dropped me off at my trailer and took off. Dusty later told me that at 8 a.m. the next day, he heard this ferocious pounding on his front door, and thought it was the police. When he opened the door, he saw a sweaty Little Tokyo demanding to know why he was left in the car. It turned out that Dusty had forgotten Little Tokyo was passed out in his back seat, drove home, and went to sleep. Dusty and I cried laughing over that one. Because we had a history together in Oklahoma, Bill Watts asked me to become his booking assistant, and I happily accepted. Bill became quite a mentor to me during that time period, and I remember wanting to be just like him. Thanks to Bill Watts, I learned how to run house shows, how to handle administrative and interoffice issues, the art of television production and formatting, and basically, how to book a major territory. I also learned a lot about politics. Even though Bill and I were coming up with the angles and finishes for every show, we did it in a way where everyone on the cards felt like they were getting a say. We would always get input from the talent, whether they were good ideas or bad ideas, and encouraged everyone to contribute, so that everyone felt good about themselves and their programs. We would use the good ideas and tweak the bad ones in a way that whoever came up with them still felt like they had invested in their finish. Bill really taught me a lot about booking, and I am extremely grateful for that. Eventually, the decision was made to turn Dusty babyface. We deliberately chose not to tease it and make it obvious there was dissension in the ranks, but instead, wanted it to just happen out of the blue. In May of 1974, we booked a match in Tampa between the team of Dusty and Pak against Eddie and Mike Graham. During the match, Dusty was holding Mike, and as Pak went to hit Mike, Mike ducked and Dusty got whacked. Dusty then beat up Pak and I, and at that moment, the American Dream was born. Around that same time, I changed Pak's name ever so slightly to Pak Song Nam. The Vietnam War was a very personal issue for many Americans in 1974, and I wanted to, in a subtle way, tie Pak Song to Vietnam. Then, I suggested that Dusty go on television and tell the people that his brother, Billy Bob, died in Vietnam, fighting so that men like Pak Song Nam could be free. Thunderbolt Patterson had been a tremendous attraction in Florida, and his interview style was one of the key ingredients in his getting over big time with the fans. Since Thunderbolt hadn't been in Florida for a while, I suggested to Dusty, since Thunderbolt isn't around, you should start doing his shuck and jive routine. Dusty started doing it, and it really got him over huge with the Florida fans. In no time, Dusty Rhodes became a better Thunderbolt Patterson than Thunderbolt Patterson ever was. I was very good at street talk, too, so I chimed in and started doing my own jive interviews against Dusty. And that's when I started calling him the son of a plumber, because that was true. Dusty and I did a lot of great things interview-wise, and had some classic jive interviews against each other. When I say that we were doing jive interviews, I want to make it clear that I was simply mocking Dusty, because he had that lisp thing going, and by no means were we going out there and making fun of black people. It was quite the contrary, actually. Dusty and I were both street guys, and he had experiences like I did as a child. Remember the racism I witnessed in the South as a child, and the impact that had on me? Dusty had humanity towards black people, as well, and the black fans really picked up on that. They became such great supporters of his that when he was wrestling one night, a black lady fell out of the balcony. When a reporter interviewed her and asked her what caused her to fall out of the balcony, she said that she was just trying to get a glimpse of the American dream. There was something in my humanity that black people picked up on, as well. The great Stevie Ray Vaughan once said that he felt like a black man trapped in a white man's body. I could relate to that, and in order to really connect with the black fans, sometimes during my interviews I would randomly throw out a statement like, "I'm not totally white, you know." Between our great jive interviews, the Vietnam War tie-in, and the fact that we were all former stablemates, Dusty Rhodes, Pak Song Nam, and I had 16 weeks of sellout business all throughout Florida that year. We did magnificent business everywhere and used to say there ain't no more after 74, because we knew that there was no way to top the success we were having that year. Dusty, Pak, and I worked really hard to make that feud memorable, and it paid off, because people still talk about it to this day. On July 4, 1974, Pak was booked to wrestle Dusty in the Jacksonville Coliseum, and as Pak and I were in the ring, Dusty came down the aisle wrapped in the American flag. It was a phenomenal sight, and the fans were going wild. We drew over $50,000 that night, which was the biggest house in the history of Florida. Sir Oliver Humperdinck and I went back to the hotel and wanted to do something unique to commemorate our successful show. Humpy was looking across the street at the Gator Bowl when he got a silly grin on his face and suggested, "How about you and I walk around the Gator Bowl backwards? That's probably never been done." I loved his idea, but added, "Let's do it while smoking a doobie." Looking back, I don't know what I enjoyed more that evening, my time with Humpy, or the doobie. For that $50,000 house in Jacksonville, by the way, Eddie Graham paid me and Pak $500 each. That's my big beef with Eddie Graham, I didn't like the way he paid. Pak and I were in the main event for the biggest house the state ever got, and he gave us $1,000 total. And if it sounds like I was paid badly, some of the underneath guys there, while we were doing sellout business, mind you, were getting $60 a night. Yes, Eddie was a brilliant guy who had great ideas about wrestling that a lot of people learned from. And yes, I enjoyed sitting down with him, having a few drinks, and arguing about wrestling philosophies. However, was I an Eddie protege? No. Did I look at him as a godlike figure? No. Did I respect him for what he had accomplished through all his hard work and determination? You're damn right. He came up through the ranks and made his bones by filling up arenas and maintaining his main event position. Even still, the way a promoter pays his talent is a very important issue, and says a lot about the man. I never had any problems with payoffs from Fred Kohler, Bert Ruby, or the Sheik, because I didn't know any better. Dory Funk Sr. was the first promoter who really showed me how I deserved to be paid, and after that, anyone who ever tried to pay me less than what he did would have a problem. If it wasn't for the fact that I had basically been banished by Jim Barnett to Florida in order to serve out some sort of purgatory for beating up Jerry Jarrett in Georgia, I would never have accepted Eddie Graham's atrocious payoffs, especially after seeing the way Jim Barnett and Jim Crockett treated their crew. Believe me, if it was any other situation, when I received that $500 payoff, I would have been long gone. However, I knew I was being punished and I took it like a man. Eventually, I brought Terry Funk in and managed him in a run against Dusty Rhodes. Their matches did great business, and the three of us came up with the I Quit match, dubbing it, the match to end all matches. That kind of a match had never been done before, and was a true original. Terry now says it was his idea and Dusty now says it was his idea, but I'm telling you, it was the three of us who came up with it. The ending was that I would quit for Terry, and my cue was when Dusty shoved a stick in Terry's eye. Terry would holler, "My eye." After saying it 3 times, I was to throw in the towel, and that was the first finish for the first I Quit match ever. Dusty and I continued our feud, even having one match where, after I lost, he shaved my beard off. Then, we worked an angle where he kicked me in my face. That idea came from the time in Australia when it really happened with Brute Bernard and Mark Lewin. After Dusty kicked me, he began wearing a face mask, explaining that Dusty broke my cheekbones and nose. Bill and I brought some good talent into Florida, such as the Mongolian Stomper and the tag team of Dominic DeNucci and Tony Parisi, both of whom I knew from Australia. I also created Gary Hart's army to continue my war with Dusty. I brought Bobby Duncombe in from Georgia, where I was scheduled to manage him but never did. Bobby had some great matches with Dusty, and is a lot like Dick Murdoch, Stan Hansen, and the Funks. A good old Texan boy and a terrific, straight-up guy. Bobby and I had a lot of laughs together. A match was booked for the Tampa Armory between me and Bobby against Dusty Rhodes and the Haiti Kid, the midget wrestler. We set up a few spots where the Haiti Kid would bite me on my ass, stomp my toes, run between my legs, and stuff like that. The audience really loved it, and I did, too. When the match started, all the wrestlers had come out from the dressing room to watch from the balcony, because they knew that this match would be a sight. At one point I dropped down to all fours and told the Haiti Kid, "All right. Now I'm your size." He snatched me in a headlock, I threw him off, he hit the ropes, and came off with a crossbody and pinned me. The building went nuts, and I could see Dick Murdoch up on the balcony almost falling off, he was laughing so hard. Everyone thought it was hilarious, and putting a midget over right in the middle of the ring is one of the most memorable things I ever did in my career. I loved wrestling midgets in tag matches, and did one of those matches with Pac, as well. However, when I brought the midget over to Pac and yelled for him to hit him, Pac couldn't bring himself to do it. Even though it was a work, he quietly begged, "Gary son, please no me little boy hit." He couldn't even call him a midget, because he didn't know the word. Bill really liked my Gary Hart's Army concept, and wanted to develop it even further. He figured that since we ran shows in Miami and Palm Beach, which both had a heavy Jewish population, it would be great if I shaved my beard, dressed up like Hitler, and led my wrestlers out to the ring doing the goose step. I was always very careful about how I presented myself, and I had to be comfortable with my character in order to do it right. And even though I portrayed an evil character, I always tried to do it with a little bit of class, and I didn't want to associate myself with the Holocaust under any circumstances. I would have been more uncomfortable doing the Sieg Heil and the goose step than I had been when I was gay Gary Hart in Amarillo, so I told Bill that there was no way I would parade around in a Hitler-esque fashion. During this time, Bill and I had gotten Eddie Graham to put 2 billboards up in Tampa in order to promote our weekly television show. Bill kept insisting that I dress up like Hitler for the billboard photo shoot, so I finally told him, "I'll do the picture if that's what you really want, but I will not go out to the ring and act like Hitler." Thankfully, that billboard in Tampa was as far as my Nazi character ever went. One night, we had a battle royal in Tampa with the winner announced as getting something ridiculous like $50,000. I mean, Tampa was a good town, but we could have said the pot was something a little more realistic. Anyways, I was at ringside managing Bobby Duncombe, who would bring someone over to me and I would pull them out. There were 25 guys in the ring, so the referee couldn't see what we were doing, but the people on my side of the ring could. We had planned to do it on every side of the ring so everyone could see it, but before we could, this hippie jumped over the railing and sucker punched me. It felt like a girl had hit me, but I turned around and grabbed him by his throat. He had this long ponytail, so I grabbed it and was going to throw him back over the rail when suddenly Dick Slater slid under the bottom rope and kicked this guy in his face so hard that it knocked my hand off his hair. Dick then looked around at the audience and growled, "Don't anybody touch this guy." Dick then rolled back in the ring and continued battling. I was so impressed with his sense of camaraderie and tenacity that as soon as I got to the dressing room, I told Bill that I had to manage Dick Slater, as well. During the summer of 1974, Dusty Rhodes and I went into the t-shirt business together. Yes, we were in the midst of a heated feud throughout the state of Florida, but in reality, we were very tight. We invested $250 apiece and printed up Dusty Rhodes t-shirts. Dusty then sold them out of the back of his white 1972 El Dorado. It had stars and stripes down the sides, and across the front it said, "The American Dream." It was very noticeable, and when he pulled up at an arena, people would rush his car to meet him. Then when he would open his trunk, people would see the t-shirts and ask if they could buy one. He would tell them to speak to some friend of his, and leave him there to sell every single one. We printed up these t-shirts in secret, because wrestlers weren't allowed to sell concessions, and over a period of 6 weeks, before Eddie Graham caught on and made us stop, Dusty and I made $2,500 selling shirts out of the back of his trunk. That's when Dusty and I decided to go into the concert promoting business. We would take the $2,500 that we made on our t-shirt venture and invest it in a rock concert at the Fort Hesterly Armory featuring Dusty Rhodes. I tried to talk him into booking Bobby Blue Bland for $1,000, because that would leave us $1,500 to rent the arena and promote the concert. However, Dusty took an affront to that and made it clear that he didn't need Bobby Blue Bland to support him. He wanted to headline the concert on his own. Actually, my idea was to have Bobby headline the show and just have Dusty come out as a guest for a couple of songs. Somehow, Dusty assumed I was suggesting Bobby Blue Bland play backup for Dusty Rhodes. After nixing Bobby's involvement, Dusty insisted that we promote the American Dream's rock and roll revival, and I figured that just might work. The American Dream was huge in Tampa, and Dusty always loved to sing. He and Dick Murdoch would go out, have a few beers, and get up and sing at the bars in Tampa on a pretty regular basis. In fact, a young kid named Terry Bollea used to play bass in local Tampa bands at the time, and he backed up Dusty and Dick on more than one occasion. Terry Bollea grew up to be, of course, Hulk Hogan. Dusty and I booked the show for Sunday night, October 6, 1974, and set about putting together a backing band for him. We budgeted $500 for the musicians, and they were pretty good. Dusty then recruited Bob Armstrong, Mike Graham, Jerry Briscoe, Don Morocco, and Steve Kieran, dubbed the Outlaws, to be his backup singers. Unfortunately, they couldn't sing or dance, but they never claimed they could. Dusty and I worked up a pretty good set list, with songs like Workin' at the Car Wash Blues by Jim Croce, Okie from Muskogee by Merle Haggard, Long, Black Limousine, by Elvis Presley, and songs by David Allan Coe and Waylon Jennings thrown in for good measure. We advertised the concert in newspapers and posters around town, and hoped that the American Dream could pack 'em in. I couldn't be at the concert that night because Dusty and I were feuding. So at 8:30 p.m., 30 minutes after the concert started, I told my wife I was going to drive by the Fort Hesterly Armory, take a look at the parking lot, and get a sense of the turnout. Imagine my surprise when I saw there were about 120 cars in the parking lot. At that point, I realized that either we didn't do a very good job of promoting the concert, or nobody cared about hearing Dusty sing. I spoke to Dusty after the concert, and he blamed the poor turnout on the office, reasoning that if they would have allowed us to promote it on the TV show, we would have had a sellout. Dusty wasn't upset though, and had a great time that night, and I guess that was the most important thing. In fact, for all you hardcore collectors out there, there's a videotape of that concert floating around out there somewhere featuring Dusty Rhodes up there signing and dancing. Business in Florida was so good, and the trips were so long, that every now and then some of the boys would put up $50 each and charter 2 planes. There was a blue one called Old Blue, and an orange one inexplicably called Big Red. We leased them from a company in Tampa, and the pilots were retired military men who had flown during the Korean and Vietnam wars. One time we were coming back from Miami, and a couple of the guys lit up a number and passed it around. When it got to me and I didn't take a hit, everyone looked at me like I had gone mad. When I explained that I simply wasn't comfortable smoking a joint on someone else's plane, everyone laughed at me, called me a goody-goody, and said that it must be because I was working in the office. I made it clear that the office had nothing to do with it, but that I personally found what they were doing rude and disrespectful, because the pilot had fought for us in a war. Sure enough, the first thing the pilot did when we landed was call Eddie Graham. That incident blew up to the point that Jim Barnett was notified, and he immediately flew down for an emergency meeting with the entire roster. That in and of itself was pretty historical, because it was the first time a promoter had to come in and scold a group of guys for marijuana, and it was the first time drugs was ever be discussed in a group setting like that. The day of the meeting, I was curious to see how Jim would handle it, because I knew that he personally found nothing wrong with marijuana, as he and I had shared a few numbers over the years. When we were all gathered together, Jim told us that he was very disappointed in the guys who were smoking dope on the plane, and that whoever had smoked would be let go immediately. Meanwhile, Eddie was furiously calling every stooge he knew, and since I was on the plane and it was well known that I smoked marijuana, my name got included as one of the culprits. This had gotten out of hand, and people were literally going to lose their jobs over this incident. Even though Buddy Colt had his own plane, he was on the plane with us that night, and even thanked me for not taking a hit when it was passed to me. Once he heard that I was being implicated, he went straight to the office to speak on my behalf. He told Eddie Graham that while there were people smoking on the plane, I wasn't one of them. Buddy is a quality guy in every way. I had originally met him during my run in Georgia, and I always liked him a lot, but after he stood up for me and cleared my name when he didn't have to, I gained a newfound respect for him. In late 1974, Bill Watts told me that he had made a deal to go back to Oklahoma, where he would be the booker. He then asked me if I would come along with him and be his assistant there, as well. When I agreed, we started making plans to leave Florida, and my old friend Bobby Shane was brought in to replace Bill as the booker. The plan was that Bill and I would work through February 1975, finishing up our responsibilities and transferring the book